think probably my number one toxic trait, looking back, that I can see now is I was very defensive. And I think we both were very defensive. So we never really heard one another in a discussion / argument. He would say a lot. If I would want to talk about something, he would say, I don't want to argue, so shut it down, which is not a good thing. On either side, you need it. But it may have been because I was I would get really defensive. And when you're defensive, I don't think you can truly hear what the other person is trying to express. No, because you'll want to leave it in the clip, and that's not happening. The world is not ready for this voice.
This is going to actually be a demo tape for your mom.
Man, I was waxing my truck this week.
I thought you were going to say your back.
No, I was waxing my truck this week, and so I was pulling a little Karate Kid, a little wax on, wax off, and I jacked it up. So if I seem a little...
Welcome to the 50 Club.
Thanks.
Well, I'm not there yet, so I guess you have to welcome me.
Given identifying information. So, hey, what do you want to talk today? What do you want to talk about? Coffee with Christy with no coffee.
Well, I don't drink coffee, so there's that.
You
feel ready? Or you feel warmed up now?
Do
you want me to start?
Yeah, you always get this like camera stage fright. We started, and all of a sudden you're like...
Let me sit up straight.
Try
to get rid of the double
Will
chin.
Ferrell. Did you just totally forget everything we've talked about?
Oh, did you want me to start?
Yeah. We were started. See, that's what I'm saying.
Oh.
We talked about this too.
Okay.
And we have to cut all of that out. Maybe not. I guess that's some good stuff.
Well,
So today...
See, you tell me to start and then you start talking over me. Toxic trait number 1. Speaking over your partner and not listening.
Yeah. Communication. How important is communication?
I know.
Super important.
It's come up a lot lately. But I think today... Well, I mean within these podcasts, not at home. But we're going to talk a little bit about toxic communication in relationships.
We got on this subject at home as we were thinking about the progression of a relationship, right? And how it's so important to start out thinking about communication, right? Because that's the key to everything. And we're like, wow, there's so much there, the way to do it and the way to not to do it. And so I think we could jump off and talk about, here are the 12 things you don't do. If you want
or try not to do, because I think as humans, we definitely fall into some of these toxic ways of communicating without even realizing it. So I think if you kind of put it in the forefront, that helps keep your relationship a little healthier.
I agree. We bring up so much stuff into our relationship, past things we've learned from the past. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was like, where do you think we learn most of our traits? You think it's really our parents?
Oh, I definitely think that's a big part of it. I mean, look how many years you're in that environment and you're at such a young, formative age learning, and I think it definitely plays a huge role.
So what do I do wrong? I just tell the world. Tell the world when it comes to communication.
Well, no, we're not here to pick each other apart.
I know.
I learned a lot through my failed first marriage, and ways that I well, hopefully there's only
Working
2
on the second marriage.
Hopefully this is it. So that's why we try to implement good, healthy communication tactics and stay away from these toxic ones. But I definitely learned a lot, and I'm not saying it was all him. I definitely had a lot of texting.
Texting.
That's another problem. Too much texting.
Yeah.
But I definitely had some toxic communication traits myself that I was very unaware of.
Yeah, ditto. I think I brought, well, I don't know if I brought a lot in. I think back to the environment that I grew up in and how communication was. I just wouldn't want to repeat it. Yeah. And I was thinking for like the first few years of my life, and things were just, I don't know, it seemed normal. Things kind of, the wheels started kind of falling off in my household when I turned about 10, 11. There was just a lot of family events, a lot of trauma, a lot of bad events that just created an upheaval. And of course that changed the dynamic of the family, and it changed. And I shared a little bit before about how it just created havoc. And then so my parents and associated family members are trying to figure out how to deal with life, and everybody deals with it differently. I think mine.
I mean, and you definitely carry that over in how you deal with conflict in a romantic relationship for sure. If that's how you've learned to deal with conflict in your family relationship.
Right, or not learn how, right? Not learn how to deal with conflict. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that dysfunction. And if you're not intentional, or if you don't have somebody to step in to help you, I hear so many friends of mine talk about, I had this teacher that was just really instrumental in my life, or I had this coach, or another family member who was able to kind of reach into where they're at and pour into them. And I think because they probably saw, the need, either the child had potential that they saw, or they realized they were in a shitty situation and they want to reach in and help. And I actually know a lot of people that, they say by a miracle they were able to have somebody that was brought some kind of consistency into their life and really changed them.
So what were some of those habits in communicating that you brought over into your relationship that you would label as toxic?
Well, I don't think we have enough time in one podcast to talk about all those. But, for me, I always say that for me. I want to have to cut that out. But I think a lot of it has to do with the personality of the individual. So looking back, I think a lot of the ways that I brought in, or what I brought in, was this like sarcasm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can be very cutting and sarcastic in a very tearing down way when I'm feeling either threatened or not physically threatened, but threatened in a relationship, or combative or argumentative. That seems to be the way I always showed up. And I know I learned a lot of that just from, my father and maybe family members. It's how we communicated. It was always a part of who we were. Sarcasm isn't bad, actually.
Oh no, it can be fun and playful.
Yeah, when we first met, what I loved about your personality was like the banter and the sarcasm, and you were kind of.
But there's definitely a difference in when you're trying to hurt someone than when you're just kind of playing around with someone.
Yes, and I was very good with my words, so it wasn't.
I am not.
Yeah, so it wasn't premeditated, but I just, I don't know, subconsciously or somehow learned this trait to be able to get the upper hand or be able to create my battlefield. That was in my arsenal. And I definitely carried that into a serious relationship.
Yeah, I think probably my number one toxic trait, looking back, that I can see now is I was very defensive. And I think we both were very defensive. So we never really heard one another in a discussion / argument. He would say a lot. If I would want to talk about something, he would say, I don't want to argue, so shut it down, which is not a good thing. On either side, you need it. But it may have been because I was I would get really defensive. And when you're defensive, I don't think you can truly hear what the other person is trying to express.
So what's defensiveness look like for you?
What do you mean? What's defensive look like?
That's kind of what I would expect from somebody like you.
Ooh,
sarcasm.
I got that a lot. Yeah, sarcasm and
no, that was me. That was
and mocking. Yeah. So that builds resentment.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have empathy for the other person. You kind of lose respect, and that is all a downhill spiral for a relationship.
So when you become defensive, how do you react? Do you just shut up? Do you get quiet? Do you, like me, get sarcastic? Do you yell? Like, what is it? What form does that take?
I think I do at times when I feel threatened, get defensive, and then I shut down. I don't want to face it. I don't want to deal with it. If you're not hearing me, I'm shutting down. If I feel like I'm not being heard, which just further makes the problem worse. I mean, I've learned that. I feel like I'm better about not doing that. But as humans, you know, we sometimes fall back into those old habits. And that's why I think it's so important to really talk about your communication style. Be empathetic of the person's past and like how they've grown up. That may play a large role. And if you're just open and communicate about it, you can fix some of those problems. You can change some of those behaviors if you know where that person's coming from.
I think you can change all of those.
Yes.
Right. But it takes intentionality and it takes discipline.
Yeah.
And if you're not taught that, or if you don't have a role model, if you're not, I used to tell my kids all the time, you know, more is caught than taught. And we learn more by observing, way more than we do by reading or somebody telling us.
Oh, yeah. Body language, like rude, silent treatment, body languages can be so much worse than words in a relationship.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's a really interesting point, because when we talk about effective communication, it's not always, but so many people focus on the words that are said, you know, and those tools that you use to communicate effectively. And I don't know what the statistic is exactly. It changes a little bit, but I'm just going to go ahead and go with the average that I've heard is like 60% of what you communicate is nonverbal. And if you think about
absolutely.
If you think about it, that's true. I mean, we don't normally stop to think how many cues we take from somebody else by their body posture or their eyes or their face. You know, the RBF, is that right? Resting bitch face.
Well, I used to say, oh, well, you know, we didn't argue in front of our kids, so I thought that was great. But the unspoken body language that they saw, I'm sure, was just as bad as if we would have had the argument in front of them.
Yep. And then we were like, how did they know this, or how did they know that? We never talked about them.
Right.
You know, we never argue. I've heard people say, it wasn't me, we never argued in front of the kids. We never brought up these subjects. And you're like, how did they know? Well, intuitively, because you think, like, I pick up so much more from somebody's nonverbal, how they communicate nonverbally, way more than when they say something.
I think the silent treatment builds up so much resentment in a partner. I think that's a terrible toxic way of communicate. Well, if you give your partner the silent treatment, like, I don't want to hear what you have to say, you know, and ignoring them for the rest of the day because they've done something to make you mad, rather than sitting down and just talking about it. Seems like it's so hard for people sometimes to just be vulnerable and sit down and say, I feel like this, that made me feel like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, because all of that is counterintuitive. So you want to, you know, you have an issue, you want to have conflict resolution. At the end of the day, both people that are having a conversation with each other, they want to resolve it, right? You want to get to a place where you feel good, where you feel like you're being heard. But why does it seem so damn hard to actually get there? And I don't know, the answer, but it's like we have all of these belief systems, and so much about it is what we believe about ourselves.
I wonder how different the divorce rate would be if, you know, it's taken us this long to see and to kind of learn from our failures. But if we would have had those tools in the beginning, I just wonder how different. I mean, I'm glad my life's different, but you know what I mean? Other relationships, you wonder how many other relationships really could have been saved and not had to experience a lot of pain that they have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're bringing all your new learnings to our marriage. So this
I am. That's the whole point of this.
But there's so many different ways, and you could have an hours long conversation about communication. I used to spend a lot of time in team dynamics, say in my career side, talking about effective communication, and it becomes exponentially more difficult when you start adding 2 or 3 or 4 or more people into a conversation, because then you've got, their beliefs, the way they show up, their method of communication. And so fortunately, I feel fortunate I've had a lot of, I don't say training, but real world experience in being
a lot,
yeah.
world
But being in those
experience.
environments, and then being able to take those learnings and apply them to my own life,
Yeah.
in how I show up every day.
So how do you think you let go of I'm not saying your toxic traits per se, but what would you say to someone that realizes they have a lot of these toxic traits in communicating within their relationship? Like, how do you get past that? How do you let go of that?
Well, I mean, the key is, I think one of the keys is, if you're in a relationship and you feel like you're always kind of hitting a wall, and you always feel like it's frustrating, and you always feel like you're losing ground and whatever, if it just feels difficult, then that should be the signal that something's off. So from there, you have to be self-aware enough and have the self-discipline to like pull back and create some time where you can be alone initially and start reflecting, saying, okay, how am I showing up?
Because I think we as people tend to kind of point the finger at the other person and like, well, you've made me feel this way because of this. And I think, I don't know, a lot of people, probably me included, kind of default to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that we always want to be understood way before we try to take the time to understand. Sounds a little cliche, but it really isn't. And so what we do is we project, and we make
Gaslight.
and gaslight, right? And we make this situation about the other person. You're not showing up right. One of the things I learned over the years, and I thought was really key, and before I go into that, none of this is like new. Like, this isn't like new revelation, new science, new psychology. This is just the basics. And it sounds easy, but the difficult part is to put into practice and put into play.
And it's an important conversation because you kind of fall into old habits and not even realize it.
Yep. I know you've heard me say this before, but there's an old, Shakespeare said, it's easier to tell 20 people what to do than it is to be one of the 20 to actually follow your own advice. And it's true. So there's no shortcut from discipline. And so we could get into the tools and tips and techniques, but I think right now it's good to maybe throw out what are some of the flags you're either seeing in the other person, toxic communications traits, or what are some of the ones that you're seeing in yourself? So you've already named some, right? The silent treatment, talking at somebody, not to somebody, and we can unpack any of these.
That makes me shut down quick. If someone's just talking at me and they aren't interested to hear my side of the story. Look, there's that defensiveness again, my side of the story, and you have to kind of let all that go.
It can be as overt or as confrontational as like verbal abuse, like verbally tearing someone down, which I experienced a lot watching my parents. My father verbally tore my mom down a lot. So but it can be as I want to say covert or as indirect or as gentle as as like waiting for someone, not listening to what the other person's saying, but rather formulating in your mind what you're going to say. And it's kind of funny because we talk about this when we're doing this podcast, having this conversation and staying on track and really wanting to share our thoughts and opinions. This is like for you and I, it's really making us work on and build our listening.
Right. We want to practice what we preach, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a constant work in progress. Like, you have the intention to be a certain way, but you can fall back into old habits. So that's why I think it's great to bring this conversation up. It may be things that people already know, but like I said, if you keep it in the forefront of your mind, it can really impact your relationship.
Mm-hmm. So we can throw out a few of these things that we see or we've experienced or friends of ours have experienced.
And I'm sure we've experienced them all, actually,
Mm-hmm.
in our many years of relationship experience in the past.
Yeah. So you talk about like, what's the word? I can splice this out, but like pet peeves. What are the some of the pet peeves in communication styles? I'll share a couple. Like mine is.
Are these going to be about me?
They're all about you. This is learning for you. This is my time to teach you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Teach you how to show up better.
These are all very toxic traits. These are all just examples.
Why don't we give an example of what it looks like to talk toxically to each other? Okay.
No.
Shut up. I'm talking.
Continue your thought, asshole. Name calling. Let's
So-
see. There's so many.
I've never experienced this one, but I've had friends that I know and people I know that share this, and it's really, I think it happens a lot. Is I call it extortion. Basically, where you hold something over the other person's head and are unwilling to do it until they perform or meet your expectation. Perform.
What are we talking about here?
I know. Well, sex is one of them, right? People say, I've heard it.
Oh, yeah.
A bunch of people like, they withhold sex from their partner because of something they either didn't do, or didn't say correctly, or did or whatever. And so
I think keeping score is a bad toxic trait.
Yeah, there's
for
just
sure.
nothing good comes of that. And I don't know, there's 100 reasons why people do that, and whether it was learned behavior or they felt in another relationship. Maybe it was in their growing up relationship where they learn that if they held something, they had control of something, they could use that as a tool.
It probably feels like you have more control over the situation.
As a lever, right, to get the way they want. So, and at the end of the day, isn't really just a human experience all about getting our needs met? I mean, think about it. It's all just how do we meet our needs? And so we learn these traits.
Yeah.
And they can be useful. I think all of them can be useful if they're deployed in the right way.
I better get my foot rubbed tonight.
That's an unmet expectation.
Oh, it's going to be met.
It's over the world. Yeah, this woman wants her feet rubbed every night. Yeah.
I mean, it's been that way forever. Everyone knows what they're getting into.
Right. Another one. You had any experience with gaslighting? And a lot of people might not know what that is. So I don't
really know how to break it down verbally because my talking skills are a little lackluster compared to yours. Why don't you give your definition of gaslighting, and then I'll tell you some of my situations I had.
Yeah, I don't know what the correct definition is. I'm sure that psychologists would be able to say this is a textbook definition, but for me, it's two things. It's one, it's all making the other person feel like everything that's wrong is their problem.
Yes, I have experienced that.
Mm-hmm. And then utilizing conversation to make people continually feel like they're the problem.
Yeah.
It's a mind fuck. I don't know another way to say it.
Yeah.
And I've experienced it too.
Yeah. Almost like I've experienced almost like a baiting to kind of get me riled up and then say, oh, there's the real you. Like to try to label me as this angry person. I think that's definitely a form of gaslighting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference there between blaming, and I think we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty of blaming the other person for something. That's one thing. Gaslighting is very intentional, and people know what they're doing because the ultimate goal of a person who gaslights is to gain control.
To tear someone down. Yeah.
Well,
that's how it feels. You're slowly tore down.
But to gain control. They have to be in control of the situation. They have to be in control of everything. And the only way to do that is to elevate themselves and de-elevate, is that right? The other person to where they become submissive, and it's a control tactic. And you don't know what it is until you've been a victim of it. And it doesn't just happen with the male.
No, it doesn't.
Being the gaslighter, because I've been in a relationship where it was the other way around. where it was always my fault. I was, and it played on my emotions of knowing that I'm empathetic and that I easily take on guilt when it comes to an emotional relationship. So they played all those little chess pieces to the point where I would feel horrible getting out of that relationship. When the reality is that was the best thing for me to do.
Yeah, it's kind of a red flag when you always feel like everything's your fault or told everything's your fault. I think you definitely have to be careful and look at that. And we're talking about toxic communication skills in a relationship. And there's some people I think that are never going to change, and that's the relationships you need to get out of. And then there's some minor, gaslighting. I'm not talking about gaslighting. I'm talking about some of the other ones that can be worked on and worked through if you're able to improve your communication tactics.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And then we'll get into that in a little bit about what's a healthy way to communicate effectively.
Talk about that next.
Another one for me, and I know you've probably experienced, is the whole passive aggressive. And I don't know, I'm laughing because it's not funny.
It goes both ways, but I think women are really good at this of being passive aggressive.
There's so many memes and jokes out there about is everything okay, honey? Yes, everything's fine. Fine. Right. That's just one example, or
and that's an easy one to fall into.
Yeah.
A little bit of passive aggressive because I've found myself at times thinking, oh, they should know to do this, or they should know how this makes me feel, rather than verbally communicating. That would have been so much easier to where you're both on the same page. But instead you get your feelings hurt and you start this and or just being in a bad mood and kind of making the day difficult for them. And it's totally unfair, but very easy to fall into.
Look, men are not complex creatures. And oftentimes we don't listen, right? So
that's very true. I think my mom posted the other day or reposted something on Facebook about, I didn't know with men the ears were sold separate or something. And every woman was liking that because it does seem very true.
Yeah. I can remember times where there would be a situation where I would say, hey, the other person would say, hey, can you do such and such a task or a chore or whatever? I'd be like, yeah, I can do it. But it didn't happen in that time.
Oh, yeah, that means now you didn't know that.
Exactly right.
You better figure that one out real quick.
Right. So it was like, for whatever reason, I'll get to it. I had every intention of doing it, but in this case, if it didn't happen in like 15 minutes after it was asked, it wasn't an ask.
The passive aggressive.
Boom! The door gets slammed, and the chore gets done, and then 6 more doors get slammed, and then the person, stomps through the room and then stomps back out of the room. You're like,
and
what the hell just happened?
Right.
I was just finishing my cheeseburger.
Why can't it be, look, honey, I'd really like you to get this done now because we're going out to dinner later and I don't want us to be rushed getting ready for dinner or something. And then maybe they're like, oh, okay, this is why she wants it done now. But instead, I don't know why. And I feel like a lot of people do this in relationships. They don't just come out and say what they need or what they expect from their partner.
Right. And that'll be a good segue into where we're going on the other part. But so that happens, and then the other person doesn't understand, and then they may automatically, they're defensive or they're feeling something that's not positive, and so that's this downward spiral. And maybe it'll get resolved, but more often, and this is another big point of a toxic communication, and that is like not communicating, meaning sweeping it under the rug. How much shit gets swept under the rug, and it's like you think it's getting swept under the rug, and we're not going to talk about it.
And you think it's gone. And the next thing you know, it's boiling back up, and it's amplified because there's so much more on top that you never discussed before.
Right. Somebody had explained. No, this isn't a male versus female. We can have a lot.
Oh, I'm ready.
What I mean is the communication isn't women always show up this way and men always show up this way. But I did see a meme a long time ago. I think it was like an analogy. You have a man, and it's just like one, like a piece of string or a shoelace, and then it shows a woman and it's a big ball of yarn, right? So everything's rolled in. It just rolled in, and it just doesn't go anywhere. And eventually, when it comes out, you're like, what the hell just happened? And
it
then
can sometimes be too late. It's too big of a mountain to overcome at that point.
right, and it takes forever to get to the very root issue. And oftentimes it can just be one issue or one trait that that person continually repeats and routinely repeats, and it never gets talked about, and you fight about it, and then all of a sudden it becomes the main component of the failed relationship.
Yeah.
So
I think we definitely need to talk about some healthy aspects of communicating that you can do in a relationship to kind of avoid all this. Keep it at a molehill instead of a mountain, to where the problems can be fixed and resolved. And I think you and I are very good and intentional about trying to do that every day. So
I am anyway.
Blaming. Gaslighting. No.
What were you
You got to
saying?
end it like we always do. I don't know, because you were throwing toxic slurs at me.
So we don't need to end this one with "I love you" because this is supposed to be toxic. So I might. So in this case, I'll say I will love you, or I might love you if you do what I need you to do. Which I'm not going to tell you what it is. I just want you to figure it out. Can you accept that?
That's great.
Deadpan eyes. Yes, I love you.
I love you too.